d4. One reason for the popularity of queen's pawn openings is that from the very first move they present problems for the defender. There is no method by which black can seize the initiative or even equalize in a hurry. Despite its inherently positional nature, the queen's pawn appeals tremendously to attacking players and has always been a favorite weapon of such aggressive spirits as Alekhine, Karius, Pillsbury, Bogoljubov, Spielmann and Koll. Knight f6 brings a piece into play where it has an influence on the center. The knight move prevents white from continuing with 2e4. A master moves his knight to f6, as instinctively as he breathes. Knight f3. The knight develops toward the center, where he has the greatest freedom of action and the widest scope for his activities. The knight possesses the peculiar property of being able to attack any other piece, except another knight, without being under attack in return. This attribute makes it a fascinating piece to maneuver about the board. Combinations involving play with the knights often have a ballet-like quality to them. e6. Black can avoid the general attack of the Koll by playing 2d5, ready to reply to 3e3, with 3, bishop f5, then 4, bishop d3, bishop takes d3, exchanges bishops and black rids himself of white's most dangerous attacking piece, in this form of the opening. With his actual move, black releases his f8 bishop and does not commit himself to any specific line of defense. e3. Indicating his design, obviously white is preparing the typical Koll formation of bishop at d3, and knight at d2, to control the key e4 square, a jumping-off point for the pieces in this attack. d5. Black plants a pawn firmly in the center, but this move, in combination with 2e6, does block in the c8 bishop. Bishop d3. White begins the concentration of pressure on e4, essential in the Koll. Generally speaking, it is a good plan to mobilize the pieces on the kingside first, to enable early castling on that side. c5. This move is almost indispensable in queen's pawn openings. It is important not to play knight c6 first, as black's c-pawn must not be obstructed. Black's move strikes at the center and establishes a state of tension in that area. c3. White reinforces the d-pawn. In the event of 5, c takes d4, white can recapture with the e-pawn and open the diagonal for the c1 bishop. It may seem that white's last move denies the b1 knight his best square, but in this form of attack the knight belongs at d2. Knight bd7. This is probably superior to placing the knight at c6, at d7, the knights are in touch with each other, so that if the f6 knight is exchanged the other can get to f6, an ideal square for attack or defense. At d7, the knight keeps clear of the c-file. The more open the file is, the more useful will it be for the queen or rook that occupies it. Finally, should white play 6, d takes c5, the knight can recapture and come strongly into the game. In queen's pawn openings, black's queen's knight often does a better job at d7 than at c6. Knight bd2. Intensifying the pressure on e4, to the uninitiated, white's development has an awkward look. The pieces seem to be in each other's way, but as will be seen they can spring into action smoothly and easily. Bishop d6. More energetic than 6, bishop e7, when the bishop is limited to defensive duties. Castle kingside. White secures the safety of his king before starting any decisive action. It is dangerous to open up the position and leave the king in the center where it is exposed to a possible counterattack. White's castling is aggressive in character as the king's rook plays an important role in the coming attack. Castle kingside. Black's castling is a defensive measure. But why give the king's permanent address when white has revealed that he is preparing an assault on the kingside? It would be better strategy to keep the opponent in the dark, delay castling for a while and continue developing the pieces, which surely can do no harm. Black might bring his queen to c7, with a view to an early e5, and then fianchetto his c8, bishop, b6, followed by bishop b7. Rook e1. Still more pressure on e4. The rook gets a grip on the e-file, it is closed now but will be opened after white plays e4, and pawns are exchanged. Queen c7. An ideal location for the queen. From c7, the queen bears down on the center, especially e5, and exerts great pressure on the c-file. e4. The key move in the call. With this move white intends to blast the position wide open and release all the stored-up energy of his pieces in a searing attack. The immediate threat is 10, e5, a simple, brutal attack on two pieces. C takes d4. As compensation for being on the defensive, black controls the open c-file, temporarily. C takes d4. Better than taking with the knight, which lets black place pieces on e5 and c5. White meanwhile renews the threat of winning a piece by 11 e5. D takes e4. Black parries the threat and saddles white with an isolated d-pawn. Such a pawn is especially vulnerable to attack as it cannot be protected by another pawn, the nearest one being a couple of files away. Knight takes e4. Certainly not 11, bishop takes e4, because 11, knight takes e4, would be the response, and white loses the services of his valuable light-squared bishop. As Rousseau could not compose without his cat beside him, so I without my king's bishop cannot play chess, says Teresh. In its absence the game to me is lifeless and cold. The vitalizing factor is missing, and I can devise no plan of attack. b6. Intending to mobilize his c8 bishop. Somewhat more to the point was 11, bishop f4, restraining one of white's menacing bishops. Bishop g5. The bishop joins the attack, and vacates the c1 square. The a1 rook will swing there, drive the queen off and assume complete control of a beautiful open file. Knight takes e4. Apparently black was afraid to play 12, bishop b7, as the continuation 13, knight takes f6 check, knight takes f6, 14, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, breaks up his kingside pawn position. Rook takes e4. Superior to the natural 13, bishop takes e4, when black might reply 13, bishop b7, forcing 14, bishop d3, to avoid exchanging bishops. Then he could continue 14, bishop takes f3, 15, queen takes f3, bishop takes h2 check, consoling himself with a pawn for his troubles. Bishop b7. There is hardly anything better than this, which offers the bishop a long diagonal. If, for example, black plays 13, knight f6, then 14, rook h4, is hard to meet. Then the threat of winning a pawn by 15, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, 16, bishop takes h7 check, could not be parried by 14, h6, as 15, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, 16, rook takes h6, still wins a pawn. Rook c1. A fine, in-between move. The rook is developed effectively on the open file, while the queen is banished to the first rank. There she interferes with the a8 rook, preventing its development for a long time, forever, as it turns out. Queen b8. There is nothing else as 14, bishop takes, e4, 15, rook takes c7, bishop takes f3, 16, queen takes f3, bishop takes c7, 17, queen c6, wins a piece for white. Rook h4. The point. White's threat of 16, bishop takes h7 check, forces one of the pawns in front of the king to move forward. White gets an advantage, no matter which pawn advances, as every pawn move loosens the defending structure. Every undefended square, occasioned by such an advance, creates a weakness in the position. g6. If black tries defending the h-pawn by 15, knight f6, then 16, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, 17, bishop takes h7 check, wins the pawn just the same. Or if black advances the h-pawn by 15, h6, then 16, bishop takes h6, g takes h6, 17, rook takes h6, is an obvious sacrificial combination which shatters the cordon of pawns and exposes the king to a mating attack. After the text move, white has accomplished what he set out to do, he has forced the advance of the g-pawn. But how does he exploit the resulting weakness? Is there an attack against the pawn? Apparently there isn't, as in order to strike at it with the h-pawn, he must move the rook out of the way, and then play h4, and h5, a process which takes time and achieves little. What other line is there? Sacrifice a piece for the g-pawn? Obviously this is useless, as white still does not break through. But the pawn did advance, and there is a weakness somewhere. We know this fact to be true, and in this fact there must be the clue to the winning combination. The pawn's advance weakened the squares, h6, and f6, as they are no longer guarded by the pawn. This means that white must try to get control of these squares, either seize and occupy them with his pieces, or use them as a means of penetrating into the enemy camp. But wait. Doesn't black's knight still guard the f6 square? Indeed it does, and this knowledge provides us with the information we need. The knight is the guardian of the dark squares, and the knight must be destroyed. Bishop b5 attacks the knight, which strangely enough has no place to escape to. Queen e8. What other way is there to protect the knight? If 16, bishop c8, then 17, bishop c6, wins the exchange. If 16, bishop takes f3, 17, queen takes f3, queen e8, then 18, queen b7, wins a piece. After the actual move, the knight is pinned and a good target for further attack. Knight e5. In chess you may hit a man when he's down. Bishop c8. No better is 17, bishop takes, e5, 18, d takes, e5, uncovering the queen's attack on the knight, 18, bishop c8, or 18, bishop d5, 19, rook c7, when the miserable creature must perish. Rook takes c8. Taking the props out from under the knight. The technique is simple. If you cannot increase the pressure on a piece, see if you can dispose of one of its defenders. Queen takes c8. Certainly not 18, rook takes c8, when 19, bishop takes d7, wins 2 pieces for a rook, and then corners the queen. Bishop takes d7. White has 2 pieces for the rook, and the attack. Queen c7. Not 19, queen b7, or 19, queen b8, as 20, bishop c6, wins the exchange. The alternative was 19, queen a6, but black hopes for some counterplay on the c-file. Knight g4. The first step toward exploiting the weak dark squares brings with it a threat of mate by 21, knight f6 check, king h8, 21, king g7, is the same, 22, rook takes h7 checkmate. h5. The king needs lots of room. The freeing attempt by 20, f5, loses to 21, bishop takes, e6 check, king h8. If 21, king g7, 22, bishop h6 check, wins the exchange. 22, knight f6, and resistance is hopeless. Knight f6 check. The knight comes in on one of the critical dark squares to strike the first blow. King g7. If 21, king h8, then 22, rook takes h5 check, forces a quick mate. Knight takes h5 check. Sacrificing the knight to sweep away the pawns shielding the enemy king. G takes h5. Black must take the knight, because white mates after 22, king g8, or 22, king h7, 23, knight f6 check, king g7, 24, rook h7 checkmate. Queen takes h5. The queen's first move threatens two immediate mates on the h-file. Rook h8. The only move to stop mate, temporarily. Bishop h6 check. Appropriately enough, white administers the coup de grace on the second critical dark square. Mate follows in two moves.